You know what really makes us mad? Is wasting money on CDs with only one or two good songs.
Yeah. Tell them about punk.
What's up, posers? Welcome to Punklottopod. I'm your co-host, Justin Hensley.
And I'm your other co-host, Dylan Hensley.
And this is the show where we assign our guests a year and they choose one punk, hardcore, emo, or punk-adjacent album from that year for us to discuss. Today, we are talking with Ryan Allen of the band Extra Arms. Actually, we didn't get to really go into this, but he's been involved in like tons of other projects as well. Digging through and like seeing everything he's worked on, I was like, oh, I have almost 15 years of music here to listen to from him because they're all really good. He has played in bands Thunderbirds Are Now, Friendly Foes, and Destroy This Place. The newest record by Extra Arms is called What Is Even Happening Right Now, and it is available from Forge Again Records. Really good record. Highly recommend everybody check it out, and you'll be able to hear what it sounds like right after our intro here. What are we talking about today, Dylan?
We are talking about the year 1996, and the album is Ride the Fader by Chavez.
Yeah, it's kind of an unknown, big question mark for me going into this episode. I didn't know a lot about them or, their sound, and found a lot of stuff to talk about, and the episode's really fun and really good conversation with Ryan. If you head on over to our Patreon for $1, you get access to all of our weekly bonus audio. And this week, we are doing a little new idea we're calling Do Your Homework, where Dylan and I each assigned each other 5 songs from different artists to listen to, and then we did that and reported back what we thought about those songs. So it's a pretty fun idea. I liked it a lot, actually. I think we'll probably do this again going forward. But you can hear that on patreon.com/punklottopod, where you can also join our $10 tier, where you get to select the album we talk about on the show, which is always really fun. And you can follow us on all forms of social media, which is Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at punklottopod. We have an email address, punklottopod@gmail.com, and a voicemail, 202-688-PUNK, punklottopod.substack.com. And I believe that is everything. So, enjoy this conversation with Ryan Allen of Extra Arms.
Feeling so frustrated, 'cause you can't say a word. But you know what I'm saying, even though it sounds absurd. But you're just out there playing with no fucks to give. You spend the whole day laying, yeah, that's the way you live. You don't have to cry all the time. I'll do my best to reach your mind. So glad I found you, yeah, it must be a sign. Run with you as we cross the finish line. I didn't think I'd like you 'cause of the sharpness of your teeth, but there's nothing you can't buy through to see what's underneath. I needed some healing, someone to lick my wounds, to find that finer feeling, to improve all my moods. You don't have to cry all the time. I'll do my best to reach your mind. So glad I found you, yeah, it must be a sign. Run with you as we cross the finish line. rather be in the space between you and me. I've got you, you've got me, and I think we can all agree there's no place I'd rather be in the space between you and me. You don't have to cry all the time. I do my best to reach your mind. So glad I found you. Yeah, it must be a sign. Run with you as we cross the finish line. Run with you as we cross the finish line.
We are joined here by Ryan Allen of the band Extra Arms. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
Thanks for doing the show. This is exciting. I'm trying to think of how we reached out to each other. So I did a new release Friday audio for our Patreon, and then I think I tagged you in it, and then you messaged saying like, "Hey, I want to hear that."
Yeah.
And I said, "Give me $1 and I'll let you have it."
And I said, do you take Bitcoin? And you said no.
But no, I sent it over to you, and then I was like, "Hey, if you want to be on the show, you're welcome to be on."
Yeah. Thank
Here we
you.
are.
Thank you for making the arrangements and for saying nice things about our music.
Yeah, the album in particular that I was talking about is the new record. Just came out earlier this month as of this recording. What is even happening right now, and how's the reaction to it been?
It's been great. I mean, we're a small band. We're not like a touring, well-oiled machine. We have jobs and kids and, responsibilities, but, we still love music and enjoy playing music together. And I'm just like always working on songs and writing music. So it's been really positive, from the little tiny corner of the world that we live in. And we couldn't ask for anything more than that. It's nice to be recognized and have people reach out and say that they like it, or see some reviews that pop up on little niche blogs here and there. And it's the juice that kind of keeps the engine running. I would do this no matter what, but it definitely it feels nice to get some tiny amount of recognition, and so yeah, we're pleased for sure.
Yeah, I was trying to remember how I came across the record too. I feel like, do you know if you got on any of those sites like The Alternative?
Probably. There's so many weird websites that aggregate content. It's hard to keep track. But,
Yeah.
Like New Noise. I don't know if you read New Noise, but that certainly they've put us up or put us on, whatever people say.
Yeah.
They've written about us a few times. They definitely gave some attention to this new record, and there's other little punk, affiliated sites that we sort of live in this interesting world where we're, there's definitely a punk ethos and spirit to the music, but not in the vein of Fat Records or Epitaph. That's not I never listened to that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's not my bag at all. No diss to it. It's just not what I personally have ever gravitated towards. But there is this element of pop. I really don't even want to say this out loud, but I'm going to. There's an element of pop punk to people's ears that may not be as versed in some of the influences that I think I'm drawing from, like a band like Superchunk or the Thermals maybe. So it sort of gets lumped into that, but then there's also this power pop contingent of people that seem to dig us too. So we sort of live in this middle ground between people who are into more aggressive punk stuff, and then people who are into more like Teenage Fan Club and Matthew Sweet and things like that. And I think we kind of land sort of in the middle of it, honestly. So we sort of end up getting recognized or written about or posted about or whatever by publications or blogs or whatever that kind of come from both of those universes,
yeah, there's this, listening to the music, I definitely get this, it has to be like just like the punk ethos kind of just showing through, or like the DIY kind of spirit, which I think that, I don't know, but even like the type of bands you mentioned, like Superchunk specifically, like I fully believe that they were influenced by punk and hardcore growing up.
You're not wrong. I mean, those guys are, Mac is definitely like a, when they play Detroit, when I've seen them play Detroit, they cover like Negative Approach songs,
Yeah.
But, but then like Buzzcocks and, like 70s kind of like an early 80s punk, affiliated or adjacent stuff certainly is part of their repertoire, and they're a huge influence on this band, and I've loved them since I was 14 years old. So whatever they liked that I didn't know about when I was 14, kind of seeps into what we do or I do as a songwriter for this project as well. It's all there's no original ideas, man. It all just influence on top of influence. But I definitely gravitate towards melodic music that is guitar focused with lyrics that are hopefully like meaningful and an energy to it that certainly derives from that fury and that like desire to like play fast and hard, but do it in a way that's like catchy, and and that's kind of what we are, fast, hard, and catchy.
There is this funny, there is almost this like, well, we can't call it punk because we're not like skate punk or like hardcore or anything like that, but it's like, I don't know, my favorite punk bands are the ones that aren't those sounds, so
it doesn't.
Well, punk is sort of just this term that gets thrown around, right? That like, I think it means less and less a sound and more an approach, and you can be punk and make music that's sound-wise has nothing to do with what people, think of punk like in a Green Day sense, like noise music is punk, standing on a stage playing acoustic guitar opening for hardcore bands is punk, making your own, CDRs and printing your own like t-shirts or whatever it is, it's all punk if it means that you're doing it the way you want to do it, without anybody else telling you what to do.
Right. It's all labels anyway. We really don't have to like stick to a specific thing.
It's punk to not stick to a specific thing.
That classic. It's actually more punk to not call yourself punk.
Yep. I think that the Beatles are kind of the first punk band, honestly. Because they ended up doing so much on their own. Like, they kind of created this own world. Like, they had the same guy producing forever, and they had, they like started a record label and a publishing company, and they really like figured out a way to be self-sufficient, to an extent. Which I think was influential on everybody from Discord to Matador to, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like taking control of what you have created and presenting it to the world in a way that's like not, influenced by anybody outside of like the nucleus of what, is involved in the creative vision,
Right.
And there's different variations of that. There's an extreme version, and then there's like, less extreme, but
you didn't just show up to the recording session and then have the label be like, these are the songs that are going to be the singles. Yeah.
Right.
This is the record cover.
You dictate your destiny.
Deal with it.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, we want a white album cover with nothing on it. Fuck off. Like, that's punk as fuck, man.
Yeah. So I personally think right now we are kind of experiencing a really fun resurgence of like power pop and like slacker rock and what else were we saying? Like that early 90s indie rock sound right now. Like there's a ton of great bands doing that. And I feel like even this year alone, I've been like, whoa, there's a bunch of like these new ones that I've, or not so new, but new to me type bands that have sprung up. Have you noticed that yourself, kind of playing in that lane?
Yeah, I try to keep up with new music. I feel like if it's really easy to just continue to listen to whatever you liked in high school, and that's it. Or there's certainly people who like dig deeper, and even if like indie rock or punk or emo or whatever was like the first kind of music that they felt was their own, they certainly are digging deep into like dub reggae or jazz or just like looking for more things that like expand their musical palette, which I do as well. But I try to keep abreast of like what's going on. I mean, it's cool that there's a lot of new records by old bands that still come out. Like Superchunk, for example, put out a really great record this year, and it's a little different than some of their other records, and that's really cool to me. And a band like Guided by Voices are just like continue to release records like every 5 seconds, it feels like. But then you've got like I don't know if you have listened to Young Gov as an example, but it's Ben Cook, who used to be in Fucked Up, and he's put out a couple records over the years, and he put out 2 records this year, and they're both like really, really great. And they're definitely like kind of more like 60s, but still like there's a 90s like Teenage Fan Club Matthew Sweet vibe to them. I'm like going through this, so I have this playlist that I make every year where it's just like all the songs that I like that are new. I put it in this playlist. So like there's like a band called Mama on polyvinyl that are really, really cool and kind of sound like 90s like Smashing Pumpkins, or like Veruca Salt or something. I'm just like scrolling through here. I don't know this girl Hatchie. I don't know if you've heard her. Her earlier stuff was more like shoegaze, but this new one is like almost like 80s like dance kind of. But that's super cool. There's a band called X Void that I really like right now. I love that record. They're very like 90s kind of like jangle rock kind of, but definitely have like a punk, kind of like aggression kind of like living underneath, or like a hardcore kind of thing. There's that band Cloakroom. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're doing kind of like a hum, kind of like sludgy thing, but it's super melodic. The guy from Metz put out a new record under this Weird Nightmare moniker. That's like kind of like a home recorded, Guided by Voices-ish, but then sort of Nirvana-ish like kind of thing. And that's really, really good. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but there's definitely like you said, there's a lot of bands that are newer or brand new that are like making music that's like certainly an homage to like the power pop and like indie rock of the 90s. And I'm all for it, man. Like that's my shit. So I definitely am like paying attention.
Yeah, it's this, what is it? It's like, everything comes back around eventually, So like
for better or for worse,
I'd say we spent a good decade doing like 80s synth and new wave inspired stuff.
For sure.
And now it's funny, Dylan and I've talked about this before too. There's almost these two types of waves that will happen. You'll have this like one like overarching wave that'll last for way longer. So like say like the 80s sound was like the big giant wave that like ran throughout the entire 2010s. But also you'll see little blips of like smaller, shorter waves like that maybe wasn't as far back. So like we're already now on to like the emo revival era. So like the stuff that was at the beginning of the 2010s has now come back again for like newer bands.
Yeah, well, it's cool because the way you discover music now is so much different than when I was a teenager. You know, I was buying magazines, like that was, and reading books.
Yeah.
Like I was telling somebody the other day, like when I read that book, Come As You Are, that was about Nirvana, every page seemed to have like a reference or mention of a band that like at, 12 or 13 years old, whenever I read that book, I just, it wasn't like I didn't have an older sibling, like I was just starting to figure out like, what shows on MTV were showing the music that I was getting into, or, and there was a lot of record stores by me growing up, which I felt like really lucky to have. Like I would get in my car and I would drive up this one road and there's like 4 or 5 record stores and I'd hit them all, and then I go to this different road and there's like 2 or 3 and I hit those and I do this like big loop and get back home. But that, like that was like then walking into the store and just like looking at album covers, CD covers, and just being like, oh, that looks cool, or oh, this is on Sub Pop, so I should probably listen to this, and now it's playlists and it's placements and ads and halftime shows and you know what I mean, like it's a different thing, and I'm not like shitting on it at all, like it's cool, like I've found out about a lot of great music on Sirius Radio or a playlist that somebody shared with me, or somebody posting something to their Instagram story and they're like, oh, this sounds like that dog, or whatever, and I'm just like, cool, I'm gonna check that out. So it's actually great for someone like who's a little bit older now, is if you're like plugged into it and not intimidated by it, and it doesn't make you feel old, which it can. There's so many opportunities and avenues to find out about stuff, if you just pay attention.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we're living in like, the weirdest time ever, I feel like, which is not like a real revelation, and partly the reason why we call our record "What Is Even Happening Right Now," because I literally like have said that almost every day, like what? Okay, what? The Trump tried to let people into a rally with guns and then try to like grab a steering wheel and punch a Secret Service. Like, okay, what? I don't know, whatever. Like it's just like every day is like a new thing that you're just like scratching your head about, But
it is funny, like that you naming that album, was the record recorded in 2020 or 2021?
Yeah, it was sort of like over that both of those years. Like we started it. I was working on songs for it probably in like early 2020, even before the pandemic started. But then I started just like really ramping up my songwriting because there was nothing else to do. So wrote new songs and then different projects, and we don't have to get into it because there was a lot happening in those 2.5 years for me musically. But yeah, we ended up sort of starting it in a distanced way, where I went to a buddy's house. He had a home studio, and we masked up, and I recorded the basic, like guitar and vocal scratch tracks to a click, and then sent them to our drummer. And then he started figuring out parts, and I had already demoed everything and sent them to the band, that I did on my own at home. But that kind of kicked off a very long process of like figuring out like how to make a record when you can't jam in the same room together. And so we did it in like sort of ones and twos, and people, recorded certain things at home, and I did a lot of stuff at home, and we just kind of like mashed it all together. And, by the end of, I guess it would have been May 2021, we basically were done, and we mixed it in California with this guy, Paul Miner, who's really great, and ended up waiting a year for it to come out because of the vinyl pressing plants being so backed up. So it was really like a 2-year project when it all came down to it.
And it's funny too, because like those wait times, they're still there. Like, we know people who run record labels, and they're still like, it takes a year still to get something put out.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. It didn't used to. No. I could get a CD made now in a week and a half, though, which used to be the opposite, So you can still figure it out, and we really wanted this to come out on vinyl, like, and we didn't want to do the like, oh, we'll put it up digitally for now and then we'll do the vinyl later. We just kind of were like, let's just wait. We've never really waited. We've always felt like rushed to put things out, and like everything is so last minute. And I was just like, maybe we should just like not worry about the fact that, like, wasn't shows to play for some of that, so it just kind of, made sense to wait. And I'm glad we did, because I don't know, like, putting a record out in the summertime is nice, play some gigs, and people, and part of it was like, oh, maybe the pandemic will get better. And now it's just like a living with it stage, which I think most people are fairly comfortable with, I guess. So, people are going to shows and all that stuff again, and just kind of like have like, made peace with the risk, I suppose.
Yeah.
And that's not to sound like insensitive to people with young children who, couldn't get vaccinated until recently, or people with, that are caretakers or immunocompromised and stuff like that. Like, I realize that is also a thing for a lot of people. So don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not like, oh, fuck it, party time. But like, there is some back to normal-ish shit going on. So the wait was, I think, good for us as a band.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting too, because like there were a ton of records that came out in 2020 that is just like they had to wait 2 years to like play any of the songs.
Yeah,
off
you're
of.
waiting no matter what. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you're either waiting to, release it and then do your normal shows and touring and stuff, or you released it and then you're still waiting to do the normal shows and touring. So, but it makes you appreciate things in a different way. So
I am curious what people in the future who are like looking back on. It's so weird to think about the future, because it's just like,
because it is the future right now.
Are we gonna have one as my main, at this point?
Maybe not.
But this idea of like maybe people like 10, 15, 20 years from now, when they're trying to like dig into, specifically like younger people, like digging into like this era of music and being like, well, why did this band wait 6 years to put out a record?
Right.
Well,
or why does this record sound so terrible? Oh, it's because they recorded it in their fucking basement.
on their iPhone.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, it's gonna look weird in the retroactively, because didn't they say too, all media or anything that was like during the influenza epidemic in like the 1920s or whatever, or like all of that media is lost. Well, one, because the age, but like nobody talks about it, nobody referred to it, nobody wanted to think about it because it sucked so bad that I wonder if it'll be the same thing where we're like, COVID? Oh, I don't want to talk about that. Let's move on.
Yeah.
I don't want to think about those years.
Yeah, they've been bad years. Before we go too far, I do want to mention that the new record is available from Forge Again Records. You have some really fun guest appearances on the album from the likes of Bob Nana of Braid and Hey Mercedes.
Yeah, Bob.
Matthew Cause from Nada Surf, Gregory McDonald from Sloan, and you had plenty of other people too on there. But like, how were you able to get like all of these people involved in the record?
With Bob, I've known Bob for a long time. I was a huge Braid fan, and I would go see them as a teenager, whenever they played Detroit. And eventually, when Hey Mercedes started, I think one of their very first shows was in Michigan with an old band of mine. And so we just kind of kept in touch, and Bob's a really, really, he's like really into like archiving, and like he's got a great memory, and so when like I would see him at shows, like he would remember me and remember my name and stuff. And so we just like sort of kept in touch and would see each other in Chicago sometimes, when touring and whatever. But I just reached out to him on Instagram. I was like, yo, dude, you want to sing on this song? And he's like, yeah. And he did it like really fast.
Wow.
I've always loved his voice, and it's a lot different than mine. So I was kind of looking for something that like kind of stuck out a little bit, and I knew that like he was the right person to ask to do what he did on it, So that was cool. But I would say Bob and I are like, we're friends, like I wouldn't say like best friends by any means, like, but we're friendly,
Yeah.
And so that was that. And then the Matthew Cause thing was just like a random, like we were friends on Facebook but never met before kind of thing. I was like, oh, Matthew Cause is on Facebook? I'll add him as a friend like 10 years ago when or whatever, I don't know when it was. But anyway, so I just reached out to him kind of with the like hope of like, well, maybe he's not doing anything because no one can tour. and maybe he's just like looking to do certain, help people out, or I don't know what he's up to, but he lives in England, but I just shot him a message and I said, hey, are you into this? And he was. And so, like our voice is a little bit more similar, so you might not like be able to pick it out as much, but I know he's on there, and I love Not a Surf. Like, I think they're one of the most like consistent bands, in the indie like genre. All their records are great. And I've seen them play, and actually they played in Detroit not too long ago. And I went and saw them, and then I ended up like running into him in the parking lot of the venue. Like, he was like walking from the bus back to the venue, and I was walking to my car, and I actually brought him a record, not our record because it hadn't come out yet, but I brought him this Agit Pop record that he had posted about on Instagram or Facebook, maybe like one of those like, I'm trying to track this. It was like I don't even remember exactly what he said, but it was like, I'm trying to track this record down. Mm-hmm. And I happened to be in a record store not too long after that and found it for like $8, and I was like, I'm gonna buy this,
right.
And so I brought it for him. I was like, hey, I got this record for you, and he was super nice, and it was good to meet him in person. I'd seen them, before, but never met him. And then Greg from Sloan, he's just a great guy. I've been a huge Sloan fan since I was a teenager as well, and I've played with Sloan a couple times, and Greg is just like a really nice guy, and so I knew like he would be down, and I knew he'd know exactly what I was like. Can you do this thing that sounds like Elvis Costello's keyboard player, Steve Naive? And he was like, yes, I can. And then he did it, and it was perfect. So really cool, easy, kind of mostly to get people to contribute. And, we got some other people who are not as known, but like close to us, to play on it as well. And it's just one of those things that like nobody was doing anything really. And so it's like, do you have a microphone in GarageBand? Yes. Okay. Yeah. So it gave the record like an extra bit of like spice and flavor that, not to say like I'm glad the pandemic happened, because I'm certainly not, but like right. You try to make the best of things, so that was the idea. It was like, well, we're making this record in this kind of different way for us, and so let me reach out to some people to see if they can add their flavor to it and make it even more special, and people were down, so I'm glad that they did. It makes it more special to me.
Yeah, I think even like doing this show, I've realized that like a lot of musicians that you like are fairly easy to get in touch with. Like, it's not that hard to be like, I'm gonna shoot them an email. If they read their email or not, that's up to them. But like,
yeah, it's cool, man. It's people are more accessible now for sure because of social media. But I remember like in a different band, this is a while back, but we were like, oh, who should we record with? And then we're like starting to make our like dream list. And like, you can pretty much record, like if you want to record with Steve Albini, you can.
Yeah.
If you want to record with Jack and Dino, you can. If you want to record with Don Zintera, you can. Like it's just about scheduling and if you have the money. Because they're working people. Like they need a constant influx of clients to pay their bills, Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that they turn some people down, but if you want to make it work, it's entirely possible. If you can travel or whatever the case may be, like you can definitely do that stuff. And it was a kind of an eye-opening moment when like I got an email back from Jack and Dino, and he's like, yeah, actually I'd like to come there, and,
oh, wow.
And we never ended up recording with him, but just like, the guy that made Bleach will answer his email and let you know if he's available or not. That's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah, like engineers too, I think are more accessible because for them it is much more of a like
it's a job.
They have a studio, like it's their thing. Yeah. And like producers, it's more of like that's more connection based. But even then, it's probably not as hard unless you're like trying to get like, I want Rick Rubin to do my record. Well, okay, he's probably not going to answer.
Maybe not that. Maybe not Kanye, but definitely Matt Talbot from Hum. Yeah. Well, he's got probably an opening, and is a cool dude, I'm sure. And, if you could drive down to Champaign, probably make it happen.
Well, I highly recommend everyone check out the record. We'll have played a song from the album on the show already by this point, but get a hold of it. Forge Again Records, that's the vinyl. You have CD copies on your Bandcamp.
Mm-hmm. Yep, extraarms.bandcamp.com or forgeagainrecords.bandcamp.com. You can listen to it, buy it. You know, it's on all the streaming things, and you know,
Yeah.
it's out there in the world, living its life, thriving, as they say.
Well, cool. That'll be in the show notes as well, too. So, let's run into the rest of the format of the show. So, basic premise of the show is we assign our guests a year, and they choose one punk, hardcore, emo, or punk-adjacent album from that year for us to talk about. And before we get into the one that you chose, let's talk about some other stuff that came out in 1996, which is the year I assigned you. So, before you selected this album, was there anything else that you were like considering talking about?
Dude, this is really tough for me because I was 16 years old in 1996, so I was driving around with the Discman with nothing else to do but listen to music.
Yeah.
I would venture to say 1996 was a really banner year for indie rock and like, you know, indie adjacent music, punk music, whatever. Like, there are so many good records that came out that really, like, to this day, like, I still love. So it was really hard for me. Like, I can just list a few. Like, the one I was probably going to pick, and then I was like, no, I should do this other one. Guided by Voices, Under the Bushes, Under the Stars. I'm a huge GBV fan, and that was a big record. For me, that was kind of the first GBV record that I knew was coming out.
Yeah.
You know, like I got into them on Alien Lanes and went backwards a little bit, but that was the one where I was like, oh, then there's a new Guided by Voices record. Like, I'm going to go to the record store and buy that, you know? So that was a big one. But like, I'll just list a few, like Pinkerton, another huge one from Weezer. Polvo's Exploded Drawing, Archers of Loaf's All the Nation's Airports, Heat Miser's Mike City's Sons, Brainiac's Hissing Prigs and the Static Couture, Lemonhead's Car Button Cloth, Stereolab's Emperor Tomato Ketchup, Not a Surf's High Low, Lily's Better Can't Make Your Life Better, REM's New Adventures in Hi-Fi, Sebado's Harmacy. Like, these are all records that came out in 1996 that, like, I loved and still love. You know, and there's a bunch that I know I'm forgetting that are, like, I know, like, Texas is, like, because I was real into emo and stuff, too. Like, Texas is the Reasons, Do You Know Who You Are? Came out, I think, in 96. So, like, I was just, like, really in this, like, phase at that point. Like, I'd already had, like, a grunge thing and, like, knew all, you know, I was into Nirvana and Mudhoney and Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and stuff. And then as you start digging deeper, you're like, oh, who's Dinosaur Jr.? And who's the, you know, like, who's Sonic Youth, you know? And that just, like, leads you on this, like, you know, kind of, down this rabbit hole of like all this independent music that's out there that came out before all that shit, and then primes you for what's about to come out.
Yeah.
You know, so by 96, like I was down, I was like ready, you know, I had already like 14, 15, like I was gobbling all this stuff up, you know, already. So 96 came around, the second Weezer record came out, you're like, oh my God, you know, I already loved the first one.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a good year for music.
That feeling, like that of getting into a band after a record came out and then realizing like, oh, I now know about them and the next one is coming out soon. Like that anticipation of like, you found the band and now something new is coming out by them for the first time you've experienced, really.
Yeah.
As a fan. That's
it's a cool thing.
It's an underrated feeling, I think. That
I agree with you, and I think now with like single drops and all, like the way that music is released these days, I guess it's not that different, you know, than like I remember driving around in my car and hearing like the local alternative rock station say, "We're gonna play the new Weezer song."
Yeah.
And I remember I was driving and I pulled over, like we're gonna play it next or whatever.
Yeah.
And I pulled my car over in the grocery store parking lot, like in the town that I lived in. And I sat there and I waited, and they played, it was El Scorcho. And I just sat in my car. Like I just sat there and I listened to the song. It's the only way I could hear it. And I was like, whoa, that is fucking weird. Why are they singing about wrestling? You know, and like cellos and half Japanese girls. Like, what in the fuck is this shit? And it was like a weird kind of like broken song, you know, and like a weird like ad libs in the back, and I was just like, okay, man. But I mean, I love that record, but it's like that kind of thing where you just like that doesn't really happen anymore, you know.
Yeah, that definitely was a thing where they would be like, we're going to play the brand new song by so-and-so, and you're just like, well, I guess I'm just going to sit in front of the radio.
Yeah, I can't go anywhere.
For a while.
My radio is here, so I have to stay here.
You very rarely have the experience of like going into, it would have been going into a store and being like, oh shit, there's a new record. Like you just see it. You had no idea it was coming out, and there it is. Like you definitely don't have that now. You just see the Spotify link. That's it.
Right. Yeah. Or walking into a record store and seeing something that looks cool. I mean, you could still do this, obviously, but like now you can go on Discogs, or you can YouTube it, or you can Shazam, or like, you know, there's all these things that you can do that like let you know if it's like, you don't have to commit the $15 that it costs to roll the dice, and maybe it's good, maybe it's bad.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, certainly you can do that still, don't get me wrong, but like there was no other way in some cases to like know if you just have to buy it and put it on and see if you like it.
Make yourself like it a lot of times.
Yeah. Oh yeah. A lot of the times. Yeah. Like I remember, like Polvo was a band like that for me where I was supposed to like it. Mm-hmm. And so I bought some Polvo CDs, and I was like, wait a second. Like, this is fucking weird shit, you know? And, like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that band, but, like, the guitars are all floppy and weird and out of tune, and it's not linear songwriting, and I eventually got it, you know?
Yeah.
But at the time, I was just like, I don't know about this, you know?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff like that, you know, where you almost have to like, well, I spent my lawn mowing money on this, so I better listen to it as many times as it takes to get my money's worth, you know?
Yeah. I asked for this for Christmas based on the one song I heard on a compilation.
Right. Totally.
So now I love it.
Yeah. Better not, you know, make my parents mad that I sold it, you know?
There's too, like, I almost now, like, if you went into a record store and you bought something and then you, like, tried to come back, you're like, I didn't like this. It's like, you had a chance to listen to it before you even bought it, you know?
Right.
We don't even now, you know, it used to be where, like, if it was, like, a used record, you just take it over to the little turntable in the store and they'd let you, like, listen to it. And now you just have to pull your phone out and be like, all right, what's the YouTube link? All right, okay, that sounds interesting.
Siri, you know, what does Fela Kuti sound like?
Right.
It's funny, do you remember Blockbuster Music? Did you have a Blockbuster? Maybe this is before your time, I don't know, but Blockbuster had a record store.
Yeah.
Blockbuster was, for those of you listening who don't know what I'm saying, Blockbuster was a chain of what they called a video store, where you walked in and you could rent a VHS cassette that worked in something called a VCR. Anyway, Blockbuster was the most popular, and so they had a record store for a while where you could go in and you could open the cellophane on the CD and you could listen to it in the store. And if you're like, no, I'm not into this, you could just give it back to the clerk and they would just rewrap it.
Yeah.
So bizarre.
It was you didn't run into that too many places. Like where we grew up listening to, like, you know, to a lot of, like, Christian music, because that's kind of what parents were kind of limiting us to.
Yeah.
So we'd go to the Christian bookstores, and that was the place where, like, you would do that. You'd be like, I want to open this up and sample it and just see what it sounds like. Because in a Christian bookstore, nobody knows what the fuck anything sounds like, because they don't know any of the bands that are there.
We got to sell these CDs somehow. We got to let them know what it actually sounds like, so maybe they'll buy it, because we're already having to force them to listen.
I don't know. We got this box. It was marked Tooth and Nail, and this 5 Iron Frenzy album. Who knows? Yeah. The thing about Christian music is so crazy to me is, like, there would just be a band that was like, oh, we're the Christian version of this band, you know?
Yeah.
So, like, oh, we're the Christian Nirvana. Like, wasn't that like Newsboys or something that were like, weren't they like a rap group and then they got like hard, you know?
Yeah.
But like, there's like, there's a lot of that, you know, like where it's just like, oh, we're we're the Christian version of Bare Naked Ladies or something like that. You know?
They would even give out, like, we had these. They would give out these little, like, charts that would say,
oh, that's awesome.
if you like artist name,
You like this secular artist.
yeah, and then the Christian comparison too. Like they'd give you like, well, if they're only listening to Christian music, maybe they're not going to know who the Goo Goo Dolls are. But
Right. That's crazy. That's funny. I did not grow up Christian, but I had some friends that were like coming out of that, you know. And I've always been very fascinated with that entry point into, you know, it's like you hear Pedro the Lion or something, you know, who was already like shifting away from Christianity and whatever. But, you know, like you hear that and you're like I remember when I heard Pedro the Lion, I was like, oh, this reminds me of Sebado. And then I found out it was Christian like after. I just like liked it. I was like, oh, this is cool. It's kind of like home recorded-ish. Like guys' vocals are like kind of, you know, unique or whatever. And the lyrics are kind of cool and interesting. And then someone's like, oh, you know, that Pedro the Lion shit's Christian. Like, what? I guess I'm not listening that closely, but like a lot of people had like that experience where like that was their gateway into more secular, underground, independent music. You know?
yeah, I think too that like coming through like that Christian gate, basically of discovering new music.
That's called heaven.
Yeah. Oh, I died. Oh, okay, I'm in heaven.
Wait, Heaven's Gate?
But there's just this.
Oh yeah. T
It's just
and
the-
dough. Are we gonna take this there? We can talk about some.
They just listen to
Some
Star
cults.
Trek.
Yeah, dude. Odie, isn't that what they would call it?
Yeah. Yep.
Odie, yeah.
I watched that documentary.
Oh, dude.
Fascinating.
Amazing. I listened to a podcast about that like years
Oh, yeah.
before. I remember when that happened. Like I was.
Yeah.
It's probably 1996. I was probably the same age.
You know what? It might be around then.
But I remember when it happened. My girlfriend's a little bit younger than me, and I was like, "Do you remember this?" And she's like, "No." I was like, "Dude, this was crazy." Like those, the video of everybody like covered with their like Nikes and shit. Like that was a wild scene.
It was
You know,
it was
and
97,
interestingly,
so really close.
So year after.
There you go.
Interesting that like that documentary, like the documentary, I thought was actually kind of like empathetic to the people. Like it seemed like they did find some community that they really, you know, connected with. It's just
Yeah. You know, they were all like hyper intelligent. You know, they were all like engineers and like, but with that hyper intelligence sometimes comes social anxiety or social awkwardness or even like, you know, some form of autism maybe or something like that where, you know, there's this kind of like magnetism between people who kind of get it, you know, and understand how they feel. Yeah, and I agree with you. I thought they painted a very like sympathetic picture to. It's not like glorifying this like mass suicide, but it was like these people like loved each other. You know, the obviously like the head of the cult was fucked. You know, but like you know, it's like it's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is taking like a real turn. What are we talking about? Weezer?
Yeah. Let's talk about the record you actually did pick. So
let's get to that.
All right. So we gave you 1996, and you selected Chavez's "Ride the Fader." couple, I call them stats on the record. Chavez formed in 1993 in New York City. Released November 6th, 1996 on Matador Records. This is the band's second full-length album. The personnel on this record is the James Lowe on drums, Scott Marshall on bass, Matt Sweeney on guitar and vocals, and Clay Tarver on guitar. And the record was produced by John Agnello, Bryce Goggin, and the rest of the band. So I have a couple of little notes about like producers and stuff like that, but we'll get to that later. First thing I like to ask though is what made you choose this album for us to talk about?
I have a lot of reasons for you that I will try not to. I've already taken up a good chunk of the digital, whatever we're recording this on.
Dat, we're going straight to Dat.
Oh, sick. I'm doing mine on my side, just straight to cassette. So right to my 4-track.
You're gonna mail it to me.
Yeah. So I think the first reason is like this is not like the music that I make personally. I don't know how to make music like Chavez makes music.
Yeah.
So it's always kind of fascinated me in that way, where they figured out a way to make a really heavy record not sound heavy, if that makes any sense. Like there's a lot of like riffs and like down-tuned like drop tunings and like very like metal almost like informed guitar and just like arrangements going on the record, but then it sort of like crashes into this vocal style. It's very like subdued and croony almost at times, and very melodic, which I understand melody, but they managed to, and then dynamics are like all over the map. Like things drop in and drop out, and verses go without any drums, or whatever. Like it's like I don't. It's not that I don't understand how they made the sound that they made, but I don't necessarily gravitate towards that in my own songwriting, and it's still like influential on me in a way, but almost in a way where it's like I'm so impressed by it that like I don't dare try to replicate it. Like I like bow to the altar of it, So that's kind of one reason. The other thing is like it's a record that's just like stuck with me over time ever since it came out. I may not have heard this in 96. I may have heard it in 97 because it came out so late in 96. Yeah. But I remember seeing there's like a artwork that's like kind of like this like fine line drawing of all the guys' faces that they would use in some promo material, and I think they had on a t-shirt back then that I always thought was like cool looking. And but anyway, like it's really stuck with me for the last I don't know, I was 16, 17 when this came out, and I'm 42 now, so whatever that math is, 30 plus years, I guess, or no, 25 years. I listen to it at least once every 6 months, and I probably have since I was 17. And I think the reason why is because I hear something new or interesting or creative in it that keeps me coming back to it and trying to understand it. And that's a really powerful thing that a record can do, is have that staying power where you're still like peeling back the layers and you're like, oh, like I never noticed this one tiny minute detail, even though I've listened to this record 1,000 times or whatever it is, So I'd say those are the two big reasons. Is like it's something that I've never not listened to, never taken a break from it, and it's something that I don't fully understand and how it came to be.
That's rare too. Like the album that like when you hit that you were that young that you don't put to the side and just kind of ignore for like years at a time. It's very rare to find a record like that.
I think anymore. It's interesting because it certainly sounds like the 90s.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, because I think the production is so great on it, and it's it has its influence, and there's bands that I think today sort of took influence from Chavez, like maybe like like I don't know if you're familiar with like the exploding in sound bands, but like Speedy Ortiz and Avlov and some of those bands certainly like draw influence from this. But I feel like it sounds like timeless to me in this way, where it's like it doesn't sound timeless like a Kinks record sounds timeless to me. Like it's different than that, but from the era it was created, I don't hear it and cringe and go like, oh, that's so 90s. Like I don't want to hear that. It's just like, oh, that certainly came out in the 90s, but this could come out now and be just as fucking kick-ass, I think.
Yeah, there is a 90s quality to it. I think that's more of like you're able to just to put your mind in that. Like there was a lot of this genre, I guess, in like the mid 90s. It's that mathy post-hardcore, but also melodic. Like there was a lot of that kind of stuff, and it's from a specific era, but like audio-wise and like production-wise, like it just sounds good and like doesn't feel dated.
No,
so, yeah.
There's no weird like effects on the drums. There's really no effects on anything. You know what I mean? Like it like I don't even think those guys use pedals. Like it like kind of in the same way like you hear a Fugazi record, and it just sounds like so
It's
unfiltered. You know what I mean?
It's just bone dry humbuckers and Marshalls. Like
right, and for that reason, it still feels like so. It's like hits you in this like such a powerful way that like, yeah, it's cool. I mean, like you have to wonder like, did they think of it in those terms when they made the record? Like, oh, if we don't like use any like signifiers of the era that we're recording this record in, 25 years from now, it'll sound just as fresh as it did when it came out. I don't know if Chavez or Fugazi is that strategic about it, or if it's more about being a purist or what. And certainly, like Chavez was, it's not like they were like, let's make a record that sounds like the 1990s.
Right.
Like they were drawing influence from, hard rock from the 70s. I hear everything from like AC/DC and like a. I don't even like a Blue Oyster Cult or something in there.
Yeah.
To like a King Crimson, like prog kind of thing, like all that's like kind of hanging out in there, and like proto metal, like Sabbath for sure, and some of those like down tuned kind of like sludgy riffs. But then there's also like a Slint kind of element to it, or whatever. Or Shudder to Think, I think is kind of like the easiest band to compare Chavez to, who was kind of happening late 80s, early 90s, so.
Yeah.
I guess my point is that it doesn't sound dated. It doesn't sound, there's no like weird slap back reverb on the snare, there's not like you hear like Nevermind, and the songs are so fucking good that you kind of ignore it, but like the guitars on Nevermind are so specific.
Yeah.
Like with that chorus effect and stuff, like that's, you don't hear that on this record,
Yeah.
It's just dry and it just rocks and it's loud, when it needs to be.
Yeah, you're right. There are audio signifiers that a lot of other bands will have, because like even if you go into the 2000s, like late 90s, early 2000s, like just the way that digital compression, when they were first figuring out how to use it, like I feel like any record from like the 2000, you're like, this sounds weird, like just weird and squashed in a way.
Well, especially with like hardcore and metal and emo records from maybe a little bit, like probably like 2005, 6, 7. Like everything, like you said, like the kick drum is so clicky, and like the obviously with like digital, you can tune the vocals and you can compress the shit out of the guitars, and you can put everything on a grid and it sounds perfect, like this record doesn't sound like that. It sounds I don't want to say it sounds flawed. It doesn't sound flawed at all to me. It just sounds real. It sounds organic. It's authentic. It's just people in a room playing their instruments and sort of playing in this really like cool, dynamic, syncopated way, and really, yeah, it just sounds like a record that could have been made in the 1970s, honestly, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it's certainly the influences from the 90s and late 80s, like indie punk college rock influences are there that wouldn't have existed in the 70s, but like I have to imagine the approach was like, yeah, we're gonna make this like Led Zeppelin made a record, you know?
And you could recreate that sound of this record too, like today, and you wouldn't be like, what are they doing with this vintage equipment? Like, you wouldn't think that at all. Like, it just feels, it's how a band sounds in their space.
Very much so, and I think that's why I love it so much. You know, it really sounds like four people creating this, you know, very dynamic rock and roll record that is a little tongue-in-cheek, maybe. I don't know if that's like what their intention was, but like some of the like dynamics and some of the things that they're doing, I'm sure that they were like getting a kick out of when they wrote it, and they're like, oh man, that's part, like we're gonna, you know, there's gonna be this bass part. This is gonna go, doo. Like what? Or the bass player fascinates me in this band because half the record he just plays like one note under like the crazy like high register guitar shit, and he's just like doon 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 doon, you know. And we could talk about the people in the band because they're all characters. Yeah. Yeah, I could go on forever. So I'll shut the fuck up. But I love this record.
Yes, you will do now what can't be done. Your unreal is here now. Correct, you can learn now what truth denies. Your unreal is here now. There is nothing to not be amazed at. There are weeks upon years upon days that things that can happen to you. Your unreal is here now. There is nothing to not be amazed at. There are weeks upon years upon days that there are weeks upon years upon days.
Dylan, what is your prior experience or knowledge with the band Chavez before listening to the record for this episode?
Chavez is a band that when you told me that we were doing this record, I think my immediate thought was, well, there's a Pablo record that year, right? And then it was, do I know what Chavez sounds like? Does Chavez sound like Pablo? And there was like this, I know I've heard this band, but I've never listened to a record, and I don't know anything about them. I don't know where they're from, but like I knew to associate them with the math rock, indie rock stuff of the 90s. And that was kind of, so like I kind of had this loose sketch of what they sounded like in my head that I don't, it's certainly like the structure is there, the framework is there for that sound of being like dynamic and noisy and being, you know, fairly syncopated. But then exactly what fills in the space, I don't think that I was right at all. 'Cause then listening to it, it was like, oh wow, they really do something so different with that framework. Mm-hmm. That I found myself making connections to really unexpected places and bands before, or maybe like a little before, a little bit later, that were unusual to me. And that's kind of my what I know of the band.
My honestly, I'd never heard the band. I'd seen the name, but I don't think I like I don't think I even had any frame of reference at all for like who this band is or what they sound like. And a lot of times my reaction to like a lot of the guest selections, they'll be like, oh, okay, that's cool, yeah. Sometimes I get a one and it goes, who I don't know who that is. So I have to then go look it up, and I'm like, oh, they were on Matador. It's not like they weren't, they were nobodies. But yeah, I had no frame of reference whatsoever, like, for this band.
And this,
so visiting it, go ahead.
No, after you.
So visiting it, I was just like, okay, I see the similar artists. I see, like, Spotify shows that Polvo and who was the other one that's like right next to them on there? It's like
Bitch Magnet,
Bitch
probably.
Magnet,
And
yeah,
like
there we go.
Slint.
Yeah.
And Mission of Burma.
And I was like, oh, okay, I know who those bands are, and I know what they sound like. So I'm like, okay, I know what to expect now. But also at the same time, I didn't really know what I was going to get, listening to it.
They were a little bit of an outlier on Matador too, sound-wise. Like, I mean, they definitely fit in the general sense. And this was in a time when I was a kid that, like, I was buying a lot of stuff on Matador, just because it was on Matador,
Mm-hmm.
Like, and Matador didn't really have a sound specific, like Chibo Mato doesn't sound like Chavez, and Chavez doesn't sound like, Railroad Jerk, or whatever. like there's a lot of varying sounds represented on that label then, and there still is now. It's not like every band has to sound like Pavement,
Mm-hmm.
And so the Matador affiliation certainly was part of the reason that I was like, oh, I need to listen to that, because they have a record before this called Gone Glimmering. I did not know that record, when I bought this album, and I went back and eventually, got the other one, which is a little less, it's a little more straightforward, I guess, than this. But, kind of like what we've sort of been dancing around and talking about is this like idea of like discovery and taking a chance on something, and when I got this record, I was familiar with the Archers of Loaf, which I think there's like a little bit of like lineage there or similarity, just because like the guitar stuff is kind of all crazy and I don't know how they're doing what they're doing kind of thing. Yeah. And of course there's like a Sonic Youthy thing happening there too. And I was definitely into Sonic Youth at this point. And then Polvo, to your point, Dylan, was a band on my radar at this point too. So I had some frames of reference, like, okay, like, it's like, it's not like 4-chord, power chord kind of, rock and roll kind of, like that's like referencing the Beatles and the Kinks and the Stones, like this is something different. But I had a frame of reference, like, oh, they're doing weird shit with their guitars, like Sonic Youth and Polvo does, or even Pavement to an extent, honestly, or even like My Bloody Valentine, like wouldn't never call this record a shoegaze record, but there are like droney things happening and like weird, like fuzzy moments where the guitar almost sounds like it's like malfunctioning, where it's like in a not in the same exact way that like it sounds on Loveless. Like Loveless sounds like it's a slowly melting thing, whereas like the guitars on the Chavez records seem like there's an electric shock happening, where it's like all of a sudden like, or like it's like a pedal, like the battery's shorting out, which is so fucking cool to me. And still to this day, like, I don't know how they did it,
I connected a lot to like Swerve Driver with like if Swerve Driver didn't use any modulation, like if it was just dissonant chords, just kind of like the way that it drones, especially with the dynamics of the rhythm section, there was definitely a big connection there.
Yeah, I love Swerve Driver, and I definitely see that as a sort of like touchstone, or even just like if you like Swerve Driver, you might like this band Chavez. And that's an interesting thing too, because like I got this new job not too long ago, and one of the guys that I work with is like real into heavy music, but he's also into other shit too. Like he's not just like strictly into heavy stuff. And I was like talking to him one day, I'm like, hey dude, have you ever heard Chavez? And he's like, no. And I was like, I was like, there. It's like if you take the music that you like and the music that I like, and you just mash them together, that might be what this sounds like, you know. And he checked it out, and he's like, "Oh yeah, dude, like this is really cool." And the weird thing too is like, so there's a song in this record called "Unreal Is Here." That's the first song I heard from them, and that is a pretty like laid back song compared to the rest of the record, you know, in terms of like. The record certainly plays around dynamics a lot, you know, and there's a lot of quiet parts, but they're usually met with like a crashing, you know, dramatic, like, you know, rhythmic thing where the whole band comes in and it's just, you know. But Unreal Is Here is kind of like a steady beat, you know, where it just kind of rides this like very relaxed drumming, and it doesn't really open up until the very end of the song. But then, so that's what I heard first. I'm like, okay. That sounds like indie rock to me, you know? And so I went and bought it, and I put it on. The first song is The Guard. It's Top Pocket Man, it's called. It starts with this like roller coaster sample. You hear these people screaming as they're clearly going down, you know, whatever the peak of the coaster is. And then it just fucking punches you in the face with a riff that is so good and sick. And I wasn't expecting that. You know, because I thought it might be more akin to what Unreal Is Here sounds like, which is a little more restrained. And I was like, oh man, I didn't expect that. But like that's like everything you without knowing it was like, oh, this is everything I want in this band. You know, heavy riffs, you know, kind of frenetic drumming. It's such a great opener. You know, the riff is huge, and it really sets the you know, template more or less for the rest of the record, and it goes in different directions from there, of course. But like you get everything. If you never heard another Chavez song, but you heard that song, you would be like, oh, you know, this is what this band sounds like. Like there wasn't like any deviations from that were so out of left field that like, you know, you would be confused as to why that was the first song on the record. You know,
the roller coaster sound itself is almost like this is what you're in for, like as far as the record goes, you know.
It's pretty brilliant, you know,
because like it has these dynamic peaks and valleys of like sometimes they're quiet, sometimes they're really loud and heavy. So like there's just this like, you know, classic Pixies buildup of a song that explodes into something else, you know.
Sure, that's why I think like Shudder to Think is kind of like as close as like I think like depending on who you're talking to, right? Like if I was talking to somebody who had no idea what Shudder to Think is, I might say like, oh, they sound like if Black Sabbath and the Pixies or Sonic Youth was a band. But Shudder to Think, I think in Chavez as well, deployed this thing that I find to be very 70s rock influence, but this like high drama where it's like, you know, like you could almost like they were just like normal looking dudes, right? But like you could see them in like almost like a shirtless, you know, like tight jeaned, long, you know, like you could like in a different era that might be how those guys presented themselves rather than just like normal guys with t-shirts and jeans on. But like there's like this flair of like it's almost like if you're like watching a magician, you know, and there's this build up, and then the trick is, you know, performed, and everybody's like, you know, oh, you know, like that's what they do with their songs. I feel like, and you know, like a King Crimson or like some proggy stuff, like has that in it, you know, too. But like nobody was really doing that in that way in the '90s, you know, where like they were really like into the like high drama, sort of like, you know, big build-up reveal thing, you know.
Yeah,
it was cool. It was cool to like not do that, you know. It was like cool to do like the opposite of that. I feel like in the '90s, and those guys were like, they didn't care about what was cool, you know. Like I read an interview with them where they were like, somebody's like, so how did like the idea for this band come together? And like Matt Sweeney was like, well, you know that part in Don't Fear the Reaper where it gets really quiet and there's like the like little lead part and then it like explodes with the almost like salsa thing for a second. That's what we wanted to do, you know? And like the Mars Volta and bands like that kind of like did that, you know, later. But nobody was really like, nobody would reference Blue Oyster Cult. in the 1990s and say like that's what we wanted to do, you know? Which is why I love this record so much. It's like it was so unconcerned with being cool that it was super fucking cool. And to my ears, you know?
Shut the Thing comparison is the one that I picked up on the most. Weirdly vocally, it almost as if like similar like tone of voice as was it Craig Wedren?
Yep.
But like not the technique that Craig has. You know, Craig has like crazy highs and like
Very operatic
very,
and theatrical. Yeah.
which I find very funny too, because there is a commonality between like Shudder to Think and Chavez, and like they have a connection to the film industry, like both bands do, which is a really
yeah. So you dug into all that
there's all
stuff?
sorts of like
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating who these people are, you know, that make up this weird band. You know.
So I have a in my notes here. I'll go through what some of them have been up to. Let's see. So Scott Marshall is the son of Gary Marshall, who was a pretty famous television producer, and probably like his most famous thing he ever produced was Happy Days. And Scott was also an actor, you know, Penny Marshall's brother, Gary.
From Laverne and Shirley, yes.
And so like Scott was an actor and a director, and while there were
Princess Diaries.
Yeah.
Or like a co-director or something. But yeah, like very non-punk, like indie rock.
Yeah. I mean, really, yeah.
like
you got like the
projects, yeah.
TV producer of like one of the most popular TV shows of like the 70s and 80s, you know. His kid is like doing this real weird rock music that I'm sure his dad was like,
you gotta love it though.
But he's like directed stuff too, and I didn't recognize any of the films that he directed. I saw he did some like acting stuff that I recognized more so, but he's also not the only one in the band to have this kind of career. So Clay Tarver is a film and television writer. He wrote that movie Joyride, which I never saw, but it's the horror movie with a truck on the cover. I think it's going for like a duel type movie. But he's also a writer and producer on Silicon Valley. Like he like
he's the showrunner.
He like 50 something episodes or however many it was or something like that.
Yep.
Like knows Mike Judge, which is very funny considering that Chavez had a music video featured on Beavis and Butthead from the previous record. And yeah, so he's written quite a bit. And you know, being showrunner in Silicon Valley, like that's a show people know, you know. And even like Matt Sweeney, I guess he basically turned into like a session musician for the most part. Like he has done collaboration albums with like Bonnie Prince Billy, but he was also in Zwan with Billy Corgan. He's on that Probot album, which was, you know, just weird, different people playing together. But like, I guess his session work, I would call it, you know, he's worked on Johnny Cash records, Adele's 21, Run the Jewels, NWK, Kid Rock, Josh Groban, like everything. Anything you could think of, he's been involved with.
Yeah. It's crazy. Like he's just like, and he worked at like Nasty Little Man in the 90s. He was a publicist. So he's like very plugged into this like New York underground music world as well. He discovered Guided by Voices basically. Like he's the one who brought them to Matador, you know, and he even played in GBV for a little bit. But he's just one of those guys. Like he had a show on, I think it was like Rolling Stone or Spin maybe, like sponsored it, called Guitar Moves, where he would interview Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top and talk to him about like his approach to guitar playing. It's really cool. Yeah, Matt Sweeney, I don't know him at all. Yeah. But he is like probably one of the coolest human beings on the planet. He's just a cool person.
He's worked with everyone, which is wild.
Yeah. Yeah, he was in that Iggy Pop band that like Josh from Queens of the Stone Age was in recently, and he's managed to like make a career doing this. Pretty amazing.
James Lowe, I couldn't really find much as far as what else he had done. He played in some other stuff, but like nothing super high profile as far as I could tell.
Yeah, he's from Michigan actually, where I'm from. From what I recall, anyways, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he is. And then I know he's like does more like scoring and symphonic stuff now. Which makes sense because his drumming, which we should talk about, is unreal. I mean, this is one of the greatest drummers, in my opinion, certainly of any 90s band, but maybe, I don't know how you can, like, I'll say it, I think one of the greatest drummers of all time, probably wrong, but like I'd put him up there. I mean, his drumming on this record is so creative and really adds such a unique character to these songs and takes them in these different directions. And even when he's playing straightforward, he does little things like, there's one song, what is it? Cold Joys, it's called, where it's kind of like a straightforward verse, but he'll hit the crash cymbal off time in this way that makes you feel like, oh, is that right? Did he mean to do that? You know? But it's so cool, and it keeps it's just like ear candy for me, where all these little moments, especially the drumming, where there's one drum roll in what's the song after Unreal Is Here?
New Room?
Yes, where everything cuts out and he just comes in with this like, it's so fucking sick. It's almost like the intro to Smells Like Teen Spirit. Yeah. You know, it's got that kind of same, where it comes in, you're just like, oh yes, I love that. So yeah, James Lowe, there's a reason why he's called the James Lowe, I think, in the liner notes, is because he's the fucking man, you know? He is unbelievable. And all over that record, I mean, every song I could say like, oh, this part. It's just great.
Every song on this record is like this.
Drumming.
Like you could point out what each instrument or musician is doing differently in every song. Like they're all doing something unique and special, I think, all over this record.
Well, and the one thing too is, especially with the rhythm section, as great of a drummer James Lowe is, he has restraint, and there's a lot of moments where he doesn't play, or the bass drops out and it's just the guitars and drums, and then the bass kind of like shoots back in, and it's like this jarring thing where that's kind of, I feel like, why they got that math rock tag. But I don't think if you ask those guys that they would agree that they were math rock. I just think that they were really into dynamics. You know, they were really into the dramatic effect that dropping something out and then bringing it back in adds to a song, and how it affects the listener and keeps them entertained and keeps them coming back, which is not, you know, I mean, especially nowadays, music feels so disposable. You know, like there's such a charm to this idea that, like, you know, if you take something away, right, and then you bring it back unexpectedly, it makes you value it so much more because you're not hearing it kind of when you want to hear it almost. You're like, well, why does this verse have no drums? Like, it'd be cool if there was drums. But then the drums show up and they're like, I'm fucking here, motherfuckers. I'm going to pound you in the face for a second. And then I'm going to go away again. And then I'm going to come back.
I'm going to kick your ass again.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's so cool. And like, the bass does that too, you know, where it just disappears. Like, in some parts of the songs where it's like, where that guitar malfunctiony thing happens, the bass is just like, it's almost just like, I'm out of here. You got, well, I don't know what you guys are doing. And then they're like, can you come back? And he's like, okay, sure. And then, you know, like, it just like knocks you upside the head.
I wonder too.
It's a pretty effective.
There's something about that though that you could also tie into. So apparently, I found an article. I don't remember where it was from Magnet Magazine, and
I had a subscription to that in the 90s, so probably
Matt
read it.
Sweeney was saying that recording this record was one of his like worst experiences of his entire life. Apparently, Scott Marshall was like barely available because of his like film work. So he was basically like, I'm over here doing this. I didn't read where they recorded this album at, but like he basically was like, I can't come to the studio. So like they kind of had to do a lot of his stuff whenever he was free. But so it almost could be a metaphor too of him being like, well, I gotta go work on this thing, and so I'm taking my bass with me, and then when I come back later, I'll play really hard here, and then
Yeah, well, it's entirely possible he didn't really know the songs.
Yeah.
Because if you listen to it from that perspective, you're like, oh well, maybe he stopped playing because he doesn't know how to play that part. You know?
I got nothing here.
Right. It's just like, I don't know. You guys wrote this, and I think it sounds fine. You know, I'll come in the chorus. But there's a magic to that. You know, like that, like whether it's circumstantial or done in a calculated way, I don't know. But it's almost like I'm trying to think of the Radiohead song on OK Computer. It might be Airbag, where the bass sort of like juts in and juts out, and it's not playing just like along with the guitar the whole time. And if you have a keen ear and you start noticing that kind of stuff, especially as a songwriter, you know, when you unlock that, where you're just like, oh, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be full on all the time. It's a really cool discovery, you know, to make. Whether you're young and you're doing it, or you're still my age and you're doing it, and you're just like, what if you didn't play? You know? And then you know, like, and that's such a, like, that really unlocks a new, you know, a new avenue to travel down.
I was going to bring up, adding to like the frustration of this record is this record has 2 producers on it. So they recorded with Bryce Goggins, who has produced albums by the Lemonheads, Space Hog, Fish, Not a Surf, you know, like bigger sort of stuff. Apparently they went and recorded with him. It was a really long, drawn out process that they thought was just like awful. Like it was unrewarding. They didn't like what they came out with. And so then they were like, okay, let's try with someone else. And so that's where John Agnello comes in, and he the same year produced Jawbox's self-titled record, but then would also do stuff by the Hold Steady, Sonic Youth, Sunvolt, Waxahachie, Warriors, Lars Stevenson, Hop Along, like, you know, cool stuff, like a lot of really cool stuff he's been involved with. And that they did in like 10 days. And that was like super duper easy for them to do with him.
I met him one time in New York. I was in a different band, and we went to the Hold Steady's studio because we were on the same label, and they were recording with him, and he was very cool. And I've listened to some interviews with him and stuff, and he seems just like a very laid back, authentic, just like normal, cool person, you know. And sometimes, you know, that I've been fortunate to record with some really great people, but the person you're recording with certainly has a profound impact sometimes on what ends up on tape, so to speak. You know, it really, you know, and you don't know sometimes. You know, you're just like I recorded this record with a different band, not Extra Arms, with Justin Pizziferrato, who has done like a bunch of the Reunion Dinosaur Jr. records.
Okay.
He's out in Northampton, Massachusetts. And I love the records he made, but I was like, I don't know this person. We're going to drive all the way out there. You know, it was like a super long drive. We got there, and he was so nice and so chill and down to do whatever. And it just like immediate was like opened up every creative path for us to do what because recording can be really nerve-wracking. And you know, if it's the wrong situation, wrong time, or whatever, like the anxiety can be heard on your recordings. You know, sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not. But yeah, I mean, you know, and that's kind of what's interesting about you bringing some of these things up is, you know, the lore. I mean, they've never made a record past this record. It should be. They made an EP that came out in like 2015, something like that.
Yeah, the Cockfighters EP in 2017, like 3.
Which they did with Agnello again.
It's like 3 tracks too. It's real short.
Yeah, and those songs are cool. Like I wish they would have done more, and maybe they will still. But it's something like it should be noted that they, in my opinion at least, they sort of made this like very, like I wouldn't change anything about this record, nothing, you know, and for them to go like, cool. We did it. Yeah. You know, like we don't have to do anything else. You know, it's kind of badass.
I think a lot of that, part of the reason why they stopped the way they did too, comes from they would like do these tours. They'd be supporting acts. The show would be awesome. I think he said they did some like show in Michigan, maybe Detroit even, where.
Yeah, which it's funny. I never saw him, but I did look at this. I did read this article today as well.
Yeah, and they played with Guided by Voices. They outsold them at the merch table. People were super into them. Next time they came to town, 25 people showed up. Like, so it was...
That's Detroit. That's Detroit for you, though. So
in
that
article very funnily mentioned, it said, and Deftones were playing upstairs, and you could hear the mosh pit.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, they were probably playing at this venue called The Shelter, which is where Eminem... like sort of got his freestyle rap battle thing going, and there's a bigger venue. It's like an old church. There's a bigger venue upstairs, and you can, when you're down there, if there's a show up there, you can feel it and hear like people jumping up and down. So I remember that show happening, and I remember for some reason I couldn't go. I've never seen them. Sadly, I've seen almost everybody I've ever wanted to see, but never saw Chavez. Maybe one day. Maybe if they
play occasionally. They do some reunion shows every once in a while.
Yeah, they did like the Pitchfork Festival and stuff not too long ago.
Yeah, it just seemed like they could never get that momentum, and a lot of their tours wound up being like financially and emotionally draining. So they were just like, it's too much work, and they're frustrated with lack of, because the people, I don't know, just people not showing up. And it wears on people eventually, and then.
Yeah, I've experienced that. I can understand it. And I think too, like the genre of music that they kind of play, like the art rock or whatever you want to call it, like it isn't. You're not gonna, you're like you're voluntarily, like you're accepting to some extent, like this isn't for everybody, right? And even like a GBV fan, might see them open and say that was cool, but it may not stick, because it's still, even though there is an overlap and there's some similarities there. I mean, it's white guys playing guitars, I guess. But, like GBV songs, the classics, we'll say, are definitely like super pop, in the same vein as, classic rock, that it's not hard to understand it, even as weird as the lyrics can be and things like that. They're still like super duper melodic, and Chavez is too, but you gotta sort of dig for it, and there's more of a navigating that you have to do to find the melodies there, which is
they're melodic in the vocal melodies are very melodic, but then they don't fit a typical song structure, so it's not something that you can sing along to per se. I mean, there are moments where you could, but it's more like I'm just gonna kind of harmonize to it, not necessarily sing along like a chorus, which is, you can make super melodic music that is not going to appeal to any kind of pop listener.
Yeah, clearly they did it, I mean, but it's non-linear, and people like linear. People don't want to think too hard, even indie rockers. Sad to say, like there's the people who are gonna dig and probably like Chavez, like that, it's very possible that they could have sent somebody down a path of like digging into more like outsider music. Like they could have, even though like some of the references are very classic rock oriented or whatever, there's a weirdness to it that could have sent somebody down a path of finding, out about things that's really like abrasive or, angular or jazz informed or whatever. Like some of James Lowe's drumming is certainly pulling from jazz. It just injected into this like these heavy riffs. So yeah, I mean, the fact that they didn't succeed is not a shock, or it shouldn't. You know what I mean? And probably it's not like any of the projects. It's not like Blonde Ambition, directed by Clay Tarver, starring Jessica Simpson, has won many awards, but like they obviously had like a things to fall back on, or in the case of Marshall, I mean, he's probably just fine financially. In fact, I assume, I don't know if you've ever seen the video for Unreal Is Here, but it is incredible, first of all. It depicts the band as a giant stadium rock band. There's a helicopter in it. At one point, they give away a check to the Chavez Kids Fund. They're like, sound checking at what I presume is the Hollywood Bowl.
I actually read that. They rented the Hollywood Bowl for the video. They said it cost them like $7,000 to rent it. And then they didn't, for a fake sound check is how they described it. Because that's what
they
which sound man was played by Donald Logue.
which Clay Tarver created the cab driver, Jimmy the Cab Driver shorts on MTV. He's the creator of them. And that guy was in those. I don't know if you remember those, but look those up because it's that guy.
That makes sense why he's in the video.
Driving in a cab and like just talking like a New York cabbie.
I feel like I've seen those.
And at one point he sneezes into a nap or like a Kleenex and he pulls it out and he's like, it looks like the MTV symbol or something. I don't know. I might be remembering that wrong, but that was like a big, funny, weird thing that I remember from being a kid watching MTV all the time. But I mean, I could be wrong here. Anybody from Chavez listening to this, please don't be mad at me. But like, maybe Scott Marshall's dad helped them with the $7,000 that it cost to rent the Hollywood Bowl. I don't know that, but either way, like, great way to like take advantage of your, of the fortunate life that you've had. Like, if I was that dude, I'd be like, you know what? We could probably fucking rent the Hollywood Bowl and a helicopter, and my dad will probably pay for it, and we'll make this like amazing video, And there's a really funny video that they made for "Break Up Your Band," which is from the previous record. It's like them on like a crazy variety show. But that's the other thing I wanted to mention about them. I know this is going on quite a while, but there was a sense of humor to them. Mm-hmm. And other bands from the 90s too, like Pavement was funny. Foo Fighters obviously made like funny videos. But there's just some kind of like, they didn't take themselves too seriously, and there was like a knowing kind of like, that's what I meant about tongue in cheek, I guess, earlier when I said that, like there's like a wink, that they're doing to like 70s glam and like big, dumb, like bloated over the top kind of like stuff that like their sound is actually referencing, but in an unironic way. Like I truly believe those guys are like, yeah, we want to do a band that like, the middle section of Don't Fear the Reaper is like a big part of what we do. Like seriously, not ironically. But there was a humor there in the way they presented themselves visually that I thought was really cool too, and really like relatable. Like if you were in on the joke, like if you got it, like you got it, which I thought was very cool.
I think I read too, like there was like a Pitchfork interview that I had to go to like archive.org to read, but in it they talked about like, I thought you, like for that video specifically, like there were people who had approached them and been like, I thought you actually played there, and it's like, well, it wasn't real, but I played there and I did a sound check there, and like I think there's a chance people didn't get that video at all.
No, and even when I saw it for the first time, I'm like, wait a second, what? They're on Matador. How are they doing this? Are they more popular than I think? Because there wasn't really a way to fact check it, And the fact that they did something like that for a song called Unreal Is Here, I mean, that's slam dunk, like humor at its like knowing, winking. That's that's brilliant to me. So, what a cool band, and hopefully like me picking this record, turn you guys on to something that you maybe weren't totally familiar with that you'll enjoy for years and years to come.
Listening to this record, it was like, this is the band that directly influenced one of my favorite obscure bands, Roadside Monument. Speaking of the Christian alternative to Chavez.
Yeah, for sure.
Is Roadside Monument, where it's like the building, the dynamics, like really heavy stuff, these like 70s rock riffs, but then also kind of like almost like a twinkly emo thing. That was the immediate like this is absolutely like the direct predecessor. Like they heard this record and then they immediately started writing songs like this. But I totally connected it to like a lot of really informative, like really important bands. Maybe not bands that I love. I mean, like Drive Like Jehu, I absolutely love. They were also like really formative band for me. But and then a broader sense of like the San Diego kind of math rock, post-hardcore stuff as well. Like Boilermaker, which is another obscure one, but
it definitely has the lineage
melodies
to that stuff for sure.
Have a lot to do with that. But then also on the other side, like I connected it to like Torch, and like
totally
that we call it brown pants metal, the smart guy stoner rock.
I never heard that.
And especially Torch, especially with that like the churning, deep, sludgy, hard riffs with these like beautiful harmonies over top, which again was like a really informative band for me. Like I don't listen to them all the time anymore, but they were super important early on. So this fits very much in my wheelhouse. It's surprising that I've never actually really listened to them before, but
it's that like contradictory combination of heaviness and very almost croony melodic vocals over top. I mean, when I heard this, I was, coming from grunge into like Weezer and Sloan and Matthew Sweet and Teenage Fan Club and really getting into like power pop. And then also at the same time getting into like Sunny Day Real Estate and Juno 44 and, Polvo, Slint a little bit, probably not as much, Unwound, like Jawbox, and they sort of like, certainly you would never call Chavez a power pop band, but the melodic element of it coupled with the sort of riffy, heavy angularity of it was like hit a real sweet spot for me. It was kind of taking both what I loved about both of those things and just like blocking it together in this really special, unique way that, certainly other bands were doing to an extent, but to me, I would listen to Chavez. I never listen to Juno 44 anymore. It's not melodic enough for me, it's just sort of meanders, but I dug it at the time because I was just like trying to find out about pretty much everything back then, but, I think I think at the end of the day, like it's really the melody that's injected into these songs that keeps me coming back, and makes me hold it in such high regard because to me, it's like not an easy thing to do to like your natural tendency if you write a heavy riff is to like yell, like, and that's what makes like a band like Torch so cool, is that they don't really do that, or even like hum, like even though like the newest hum record, the new hum record that came out a couple of years ago is super heavy, but still like the vocals are very laid back, and they don't do what you expect. And I think that's why I love this Chavez record so much, is that it's unexpected. It was unexpected then for me, and still like I don't hear a lot of bands pulling off this particular combination of heavy and melodic and soft and loud and quiet, and not in a way that like doesn't feel calculated, you know? Like this record feels very like organic, you know, in its presentation, and not like they sat in a room and talked about it forever, you know?
Yeah, which they
they
kind of rejected that math rock tag anyway.
Everyone
everybody did that.
Everyone it's like the first, 2 waves of emo. It was just like, what? No, that's a terrible name for a genre. Don't call us
but
that.
like Sunny Day Real Estate was like, we just like shudder to think, are they emo? No, like we want to be that, you know? And then they just ended up, igniting this movement essentially. But yeah, you're right. They did shun that idea of math rock, and I think rightfully so. Like, it wasn't like music for nerds or whatever math rock is. Like, it wasn't like,
I don't know who math rock's for.
It wasn't trying.
It wasn't writing odd time signatures
be,
for the sake of it.
Exactly. It wasn't trying to be technical to show off. You know, it wasn't like we're so good at our instruments and let's just do. Like that's not there. Like, and that's why I think it's more guided by voices in a weird ass way than it is, twinkly minus the bear or tappy, like it's not that. No offense to Minus the Bear, I love those guys. I toured with them once, but do you know what I'm saying? Like it's not done to impress people from a technical perspective at all, and that's why I think it feels like it has a soul where a lot of technical music doesn't,
Yeah, like.
So kudos to those guys for figuring that shit out, because it's not easy to do.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've gone close to 2 hours here, so I think we should probably wrap things up. Dylan, any final thoughts on the record?
No, I think that's everything.
Ryan, anything you want to say lastly about the album?
No, just if you haven't heard it, you should definitely check it out. We've already established that you can listen to it in about 16 different places and ways. So there's no excuse to not listen to this record. But I'm just, glad that it exists, and I have this like little hope in my heart that maybe one day those guys will make another full-length record and, just continue the legend of Chavez that is really a small catalog of music, but a special one. So.
Well, awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for doing the show. This was a lot of fun. Let everybody know where to get a hold of your stuff, your music, follow you online, all that good stuff. Yeah,
you can just go to extraarmsband.com, and there's links to everything there. And you'll be sent on your way, purchasing, streaming, the whole thing. Pretty pictures of us, videos. You gotta market. You gotta push your product. You got a TikTok. You don't have to TikTok. Chavez doesn't TikTok.
That's too much work.
And lastly, the thing we always ask our guests to do, we kind of got away from it for a minute, and recent events have inspired me to bring this back. So what I like to ask our guests is to shout out or name a charity or nonprofit that they'd like to bring some attention to. Do you have any in particular?
Oh, geez. Forgotten Harvest is a really good one in Michigan. They clothe, people who are without a home or, are, financially, in need of some assistance. I was able to volunteer there a few Christmases ago at an old job, and it was really, it was a heavy day for sure, and we helped people shop for Christmas gifts through, in sort of like a donation mall, I would call it, and it was really a great day, and so they're doing great things for women who have suffered from like domestic abuse and things like that. So look up Forgotten Harvest if you are unfamiliar.
We'll put that in the show notes. Thank you again for doing this. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. This was awesome. Thank you.